Good morning. And, and thanks so much. I want to really extend a huge thanks to Emily's List for inviting me up here to say a few words today. The fact that I'm sitting amongst a group of strong, intelligent women to discuss the changing role of women in the media, it is so exciting. It gives me hope for the world I work in. As an actress, I'm hopeful that we are on the cusp of positive change. Roles for women are evolving, becoming deeper, richer, more substantial, and more reflective of the diverse landscape that we make up. As women, we represent every aspect of the human condition, not some, so it only feels right the stories we tell in the media reflect this. And as women, we have important stories to tell. Stories of our power and our flaws, stories of our love and heartbreak, but also stories of our chosen independence. We have important stories to tell about ourselves as leaders, as mothers, as people who juggle both of these roles successfully, and many, many more. When I first auditioned for Orange is the New Black, what excited me most was that I had never seen anything like it on TV before. Frankly, I had never seen a script of its kind. Each character was so vivid and multi-layered in their construction, and I was excited by the opportunity to share space with these wonderful and gifted actresses and to watch the world of Litchfield come to life. But with that excitement came hesitation. I wondered, would a show like this find an audience? Would we welcome in characters like Poussey, the disarming Red, or the transgendered storylines of Sophia? Would it receive the backing and support needed to help make us successful? You know, there was no playbook when it came to a show about a diverse group of women from all walks of life. And just so we're clear, this story takes place in prison. But what our critical praise and audience acceptance reinforces is that these women's stories matter. People are, in fact, ready and want to hear the many different stories channeled through women. We must find ways to keep fighting to tell them, because with each small victory, we are turning feminism's moment in the media into a movement. Both as a nation and a global family, this time we are living in is percolating with movement. People want change. With women like Amy Poehler leading the charge through her Smart Girls community, and the Ask Her More campaign, to Patricia Arquette using her Oscar moment to shed light on wage inequality. It is on us to find out how we can keep pushing for change and keep the conversation going. Because it does start with the conversation, no matter how big or small. And I know that as more conversations like this take place, it will ensure that shows like Orange aren't just the exception, but rather an extension of the golden rule, and that the media landscape for women reflects our role in this society. Thank you so much for having me. God bless you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the co-host of The Cycle on MSNBC, Crystal Ball.
Can't believe I have to follow Crazy Eyes. I am Crystal Ball, co-host of The Cycle on MSNBC and also host of Crystal Clear, which is on Shift by MSNBC, which, by the way, is a show about feminism and female empowerment. So, moment of personal privilege, 11 a.m., shift.msnbc.com. I think you all would like it, by the way. They are streaming this about to be amazing panel live on Shift as well. So hello to all these shifters out there. When I was thinking about this panel, I was thinking back to when I ran for Congress back in 2010, which now feels like eons ago. And I remembered this moment where the local Republican Party put up a website that was supposed to expose, quote unquote, the real crystal ball, right? So among many other lovely things that they had on this website, they had a fake bio of me in which they listed all of my actual accomplishments. So it said software designer, CPA, right? It said small business owner, it said mom, and then they crossed down everything except mom. As if to say, first of all, that there's something wrong with being a mom, I guess, and second of all, that none of my other accomplishments amounted to anything because I was really only just a mom running for Congress. And I was thinking back about that because at the time, I tried to get people to pay attention to this. I said, this is ridiculous, it's sexist, it's obnoxious, it's over the top, it's unbelievable. And I really couldn't get any pickup for that line of attack. Something tells me that today, because of the way that the media landscape has shifted, you could no longer get away with that kind of over-the-top, blatant sexism. And that's what this panel is really about, the way that the media landscape has shifted and the way that that shift is going to impact the 2016 campaign. I'm freaking out a little bit because the panel of women I'm about to introduce is so incredible that I literally begged to get to moderate it. So I feel a little unworthy. But with that, I will go ahead and introduce our incredible panelists. First up, our guest is the former editor of Feministing and is currently a columnist at The Guardian. She also has edited, and authored 4 books on modern feminism, no big deal. I'm honored to welcome to the stage Jessica Valenti. And our next guest is the founder of Jezebel.com, the 2012 recipient of a Mirror Award for Best Commentary, and the editor of 2 books, including the book of Jezebel. She's now the editor of Digital Voices and Storytelling at cable news channel Fusion. I'm honored to welcome to the stage Anna Holmes. Our next guest is the former editor of Feminist and current senior political writer at Cosmopolitan.com. She's also an attorney and a former columnist at The Guardian, Jill Filipovich. And our next guest, you are likely to recognize. She is a Emmy award-winning actress who's portrayed a wide array of complex and powerful characters throughout her career. Most notably, you may recognize her as Skylar White on AMC's award-winning series Breaking Bad. We're so lucky to have Anna Gunn. And our final panelist is an award-winning writer, speaker, editor, as well as a leading millennial voice around issues of race, gender, and sexuality. We're lucky to have Jamila Lemieux. One housekeeping note, so I am going to ask some questions, but I know that you all likely have questions as well. If you do have questions, write them down on your questions card, your comments card, pass them to Emily's List staffer, and they'll bring them up to me so I can incorporate some of your thoughts. And with that, I want to start. You ladies got your mics on? Everybody ready to go? I wanted to start, actually, Anna Holmes, with you. I was just referencing the fact that the feminist media landscape has changed so much, so rapidly, and you were the founding editor of Jezebel in 2007, I think?
Yeah.
How have you seen things shift, and how has the response to sites like Jezebel changed over that time?
It's been a little overwhelming, to be honest, like not in a bad way, in a very good way, because I don't think I ever could have predicted it. And I don't think that I was really aware of how much the landscape had changed until after I stopped editing the site, which was in 2010, mid-2010. I was so involved in the day-to-day workings of the site and the kind of momentum that I felt that we had, but I didn't actually have any sort of objectivity as to whether it was making an impact outside of the very devoted readership that we had. But I think after actually I left, I started to see echoes of what we were doing and what sites like Jill's site and Jessica's site were doing in the more mainstream media. But I really thought maybe that my eyes were fooling me until I think about 2011, 2012, when it just felt like there was not a critical mass. I think that there's still a lot of growth with regards to women's issues in the media, if not, female-centric sites. But it's been very exciting, and as I said, again, a bit surprising and overwhelming to see, because I don't know that I could have ever predicted it. Coming from my own personal experience, I've always considered myself to be a feminist. I've always been interested in feminist issues from a very young age. I was very unapologetic about my interest in feminism, and I wanted to inject that into the site when I started it. But I had no clue as to whether it would be received well by not just self-professed feminists, but women, who maybe wouldn't call themselves as feminists. But it really does feel like there's a generation of women, both my age, I'm 41, but also younger, who are less willing to feel cowed by the idea of calling themselves feminists publicly.
Yeah. Jessica, pick up on that point, because one thing that we have discovered is that women care about these issues and drive massive traffic online.
Yeah, they do. I think it's really interesting. I feel like 10 years ago, I used to be asked a lot where the young feminists are, why aren't there more young feminists? And of course, we were always there. But now I think with social media and with blogs and everything else, we sort of can't be ignored, which is really nice. And I think the other thing that's been really exciting to watch over the last 10 years is the way that feminist spaces online and feminist voices online really laid the groundwork for the national conversation that we're having right now. The conversation that we're having on rape culture, the conversation that we're having on reproductive justice. That's a conversation that was really built from these voices in online spaces.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And Jill, to that point, started with places like Jezebel, places like Feministing. You work at Cosmo Magazine, cosmopolitan.com, so mainstream outlets are also taking this ball and running with it. I mean, we've seen stories, we had Notorious RBG, we've seen Beyoncé. Do you think that there's sort of a feminist tipping point now where more mainstream news outlets are also starting to cover these issues more accurately and more effectively?
Definitely. I can't think of a single mainstream outlet that doesn't have some feminist-minded content on it at some time. I never thought as a young feminist I would be working at Cosmopolitan. That was not, exactly like the place that I thought was going to be, a bastion of progressive feminism. But now it really is. So, a young woman can read Cosmopolitan for, nail art tips, and then right next to that there's an article about the attempts to build a Planned Parenthood in New Orleans, and then there's another article about campus sexual assault next to how to put on your eyeliner. I actually think that's a really good thing. I think it's okay for women to have a diversity of interests, and to not say that just because somebody cares about fashion or makeup that they also don't want access to political content and explicitly feminist content. I also think Cosmopolitan and other publications are responding to a cultural zeitgeist. And they are really, I don't want to use the term cashing in because it's not like they're making much money on feminism, but they're plugging into something that Feministing and Jezebel and a lot of these publications laid the groundwork of, so that you cannot have a website for young women today in 2015 and not have feminist content on it. You're not going to get the readership that you want. You're not going to be taken seriously. And I think Cosmo's move toward feminism reflects that kind of embrace of the totality of young women's lives. And I think that's very cool and very much a credit to the young feminists who have really been building this stuff from the ground up for the past decade.
Yeah, it is absolutely a credit to them. It's also a credit to the work that you've done, because I know this is something that you've championed and pushed for and done incredible work as well. Jamila, the other piece of this is the social media piece, right? How many times have we seen outrage rise up on Twitter about, let's say, what the CEO of Lululemon said about women's thighs, right? And it goes from social media outrage to actual real outcomes in the world. Talk to us about the way that women have found their power in certain senses through social media. And then I want to get Anna to talk a little bit about the downside of the Twitter sphere, so to speak.
Yeah, social media has really democratized media in ways that I don't think any of us were really expecting when we first got access to something like a MySpace or a Black Planet, you know, which kind of laid the foundation for what we now know as the internet, or social media, I should say. So that people who may have a blog, may not, may have a college education, possibly don't, can reach CEOs and politicians and thought leaders and change makers and become change agents themselves because there's something that triggered them, be it something that an entertainer said or did, a piece of legislation that was proposed, you know. I think it's a really phenomenal time to live in, and I'm someone who certainly has benefited from that. I did not necessarily think as a young feminist that I'd be an editor for Ebony magazine, and it's not so much that I felt disconnected from the content, but just that voices like mine were not traditionally privileged anywhere, because I'm also dealing with, you know, aside from not being a formally trained journalist, dealing with the racism, dealing with the sexism, the idea that someone like me can be allowed to be, and if not, even if in a very small circle, a thought leader, somebody who can advance ideas around feminism and racial inequality, that wouldn't be the case without social media. And I think that there are times that we have to be more deliberate and more measured in our messaging when we're using social media and tools like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram to respond to very serious societal problems, or turning kind of small online issues into serious problems and beefs. But
What
I
would
think
you
that
give us an example of that? Not to put you on the spot.
Well, this is probably a very petty example for me to give, but about a year and a half ago, I got into a brief Twitter row with a semi-prominent member of the RNC staff. And that led to Chairman Priebus demanding an apology from my employer. And my picture being placed on Fox News, and hundreds of people calling my job, and people who'd never picked up an Ebony magazine or read ebony.com feeling that they were entitled to decide how I should conduct myself as a member of an organization that they probably didn't like, because if you were ready to have the N word or the B word at the tip of your tongue for me, you probably didn't read Ebony.
Probably not the target Ebony
Probably
reader.
not in our target audience. You know, but again, it's something that I think could have been a productive and maybe even interesting Twitter conversation that became a campaign to attack my livelihood, my employer, and people who share some of my values. So I think that, and that's not to say that we haven't done anything like that on the left, but I just think that we have to be careful.
Right.
Because I worry about the person who's truly innocent or who's not as strong as I am, you know, who's not a little bit high profile, and kind of take that and keep moving, how that could really crush or destroy somebody who has the best of intentions.
Yeah. Anna Gunn, I was hoping you would share your story very much to that point, because you faced this crazy thing where people, first of all, which is really interesting to me, responded really negatively to your character of Skylar, this strong woman. There was this just crazy backlash against Skylar that then turned into personal attacks on you. Talk to us about what that was like and what that was all about.
Well, it was surreal at first, because I had not really. It's one of the first things that my mentors, my teachers taught me was, don't read your reviews, because if you believe the bad ones, you believe the good ones, or if you believe the good ones, you have to believe the bad ones. And so I had come from the theater. I trained myself not to look at that kind of thing as much as possible. And I think somewhere in the second season, people started coming up to me and saying, you know, there's all this stuff on the internet and all these chat rooms and blogs and this and that devoted to how much people hate your character. And I went, oh, great, thank you for telling me that. And you know, unfortunately, or fortunately in the end, I was too curious, and I went and opened up Pandora's box, and it was shocking to see what was there, because while I could understand people not liking the character for various reasons, and which eventually led me to write my op-ed for the New York Times, but the character and the show was constructed in a way in which you were meant to feel sympathy and empathy and connection with Walt, and Skylar was a very different character. But the level of vitriol and the level of hatred and anger against her was so, it really gobsmacked all of us on the show, because Walt was getting worse and worse and worse in his behavior and his actions. And when Skylar had a reaction against that, when she felt essentially trapped, and she had an affair with her boss, that was worse to everybody than anything that Walt had done. It was like, how dare she betray her husband?
Wow.
And it was really amazing. And I went through a period of not being able to stop looking at it. It became a little bit like digging into something that you really, it's not good for you.
Yeah.
But I just really wanted to understand what it was about. I thought, is it about me? Is it the way am I not playing the character? I started questioning myself. There was a lot to do with body image. There was a lot of, instead of it just being really about the character, it was, I hate her face, I hate how tall she is, I hate her this, she's too fat, she's too thin, she's too, and it really was, like going through a ring of fire, basically. But in the end, I was able to pull away from it, and I was able to look at it, and I think it really, and along with the sites, I mean, I'm so honored to be sitting here amongst you, because I really did feel like there was a female voice that was coming up in defense of Skylar, in defense of me, and that ignited my own voice, essentially, and helped me wake that up and have the I guess the nerve to write a piece about it. And everybody, my parents begged me not to write it, my friends begged me not to write it, because they thought it was gonna stir up even more vitriol, and that I would get hurt, and that possibly it would even affect my career. And I said to my mom and dad, you brought me up to be truthful and to stand up for what I believe, and this is my conviction, and I'm very glad I did it. But again, without feeling the support on the, online and in that world, I don't think I would have been able to do it.
Anna, have you seen this, Anna Gunn, have you seen this before, where a character you're playing, people really just associate that character with you? Because part of what was so crazy to me is that people weren't just like, I don't like Skylar. They were like, I don't like Skylar, and Anna Gunn should die. I mean, literally, that was the sentiment.
Yeah. I mean, I went through some pretty scary stuff, and it wasn't, it was the violence of it was, and the threats were frightening, which is why I really did have to pull away from looking at any of it myself. But there were times when, even if I wanted to look at a picture of myself, say from an event the night before, and critique my own, whatever, I would start to type in my name, and the search engine would bring up Anna Gunn pregnant, Anna Gunn fat, Anna Gunn plastic surgery. Yeah, not much about my acting, not much about my profession, but really it was mainly to do with my physical appearance.
Wow.
And the tweet that said, somebody tell me where I can find Anna Gunn so I can kill her, it was, I would have expected that to be, I expected that to be from a man, actually, and it was from a 19-year-old female college student. And that's also part of, that really confused me more than anything, I think, was the amount of women who got on the bandwagon of that kind of hatred. And that made me, again, want to write the piece, because I have 2 daughters, and I want them to really know that it really is about, I truly believe this, it's about what's inside you. And there's so much focus for every woman in every walk of life that's placed on our our outward physical appearance. And I just don't. I wanted to speak up about it. I wanted to say something about it. I felt if I didn't, I would be. It would
Thank
be,
you for doing that.
Yeah.
Jessica, what is this all about? Because we see it with Anna and Skylar. We've seen it with Lena Dunham. We've seen it with Anita Sarkeesian, where there is just this crazy, violent backlash. And I know every one of you on stage has experienced this at some level. Like, what is this all about? Where is it coming from?
I mean, I think it's obviously rampant misogyny and the sort of thing that happens when you're able to dehumanize people in this way. And I think that, there have been so many wonderful things that have come from the internet and online spaces and feminist conversations, but one of the negative things that's come from it is it's easier to dehumanize people when they're not in front of your face, and you don't see them as a person. You see them as an avatar or as a symbol for something that you really hate. And these days, a lot of what people really hate is feminism, or not a lot of people, but the misogynist wackies. What?
I was just going to say that I'd also say that women, I think, have been routinely dehumanized even before the internet. Just seen as being objects, as sex objects. So it's like this combination of the internet plus.
Right, and now we have the anonymity that covers them, whereas you can't say it like at the dinner table, like, well, you're a B or a C or whatever people want to call you. But not only can you say that, and is that like allowable and okay on the internet, you're sort of applauded for it, and you get upvoted for it, or you get liked for it. And I think the issue that Anna brought up of young women sort of participating in that is really hard to hear. My experience has mostly been sort of men harassing, but it doesn't surprise me to hear that young women also participate in it, because I think that there are social rewards to being complicit with patriarchy and with sexist.
Right.
You get that pat on the head and you feel like, well, I'm okay. And I think there's this sort of feeling like if you go on the attack, or if you attack other women, this won't happen to you. So it's also like a survival technique.
Yeah, and Anna Holmes, I mean, is part of it also that we have had a little bit of feminist power online. There are a few manifestations of women and men who are women's allies coming together and making some small changes, that there's this sort of backlash against this sense that, oh my God, women have a little bit of power.
Oh yeah, it's interesting because when Anna was talking about the character of Skylar in Breaking Bad, and I was a big Breaking Bad devotee, I actually got interviewed by somebody about female characters on television that were disliked, and the Skylar character was mentioned to me. I don't remember who it was who interviewed me, and I said to the writer that I felt that a lot of men reacted very strongly and negatively towards Skylar because they felt she was getting in the way of Walter's journey. Even though Walter was becoming an increasingly crazy, sociopathic, like nightmare, that and
how dare she?
that she was getting in the way, and that's why they had a lot of hatred towards her. And there were other female characters on television who also were seen by at least male viewers as being impediments to the hero advancing his storyline. But I also think that that's happening online. I think that when Jezebel, for example, started, we actually didn't get a lot of abuse directed our way because I think we were kind of under the radar. Not necessarily with women who were reading content on the internet, but with regards to men. You weren't getting in their way. When the site and other sites like it started getting in the way, which is to say, actually affecting things in the broader political sphere, cultural sphere, is when you started to see a lot of the writers on the site and on sites like it really start to get abused. Like you mentioned, Anita Sarkeesian. She was getting in the way of male gamers' ideas of I don't know what,
right.
their own legitimacy. So. In a way, there is a backlash because women are having an effect. And I think that one interesting thing, and that Anna also touched on, is the idea that the internet has brought with it, for women at least, a feeling of community that has inspired them to speak out more and more and more. There's been a sense of momentum, but the downside to that is that because we're having an actual effect, that a lot of angry people are being abusive. But I hate to say that that's like the silver lining to the abuse, that it means that we're getting somewhere.
That we're actually making progress.
But I do think that they're very intimately connected.
I think it's a helpful frame to think of it, right? When you are seeing lots of trolls clogging up your timeline, saying lots of ugly things about you, I think it's helpful to keep in mind this is because we're having some wins. That's what this is about. Jill, an interesting thing happened to you and to Cosmo Magazine too when you all decided to roll out an endorsement process. Now Cosmo has had political content for a long time, but Cosmo is also known for fashion and sex tips. And there was almost this sense of like, how dare you have an opinion about politics? You're supposed to stay in your lane and just talk about girly things like clothes. Right, exactly, which was interesting to see kind of the way that people treated that, very condescendingly. Male publications cover sports all the time, which are not exactly like changing the world to be better, or having much of an impact. And I like sports, sports are great, but it's not like sports are any more inherently more serious than fashion or makeup. But seeing Cosmo talk about politics and take a stand really made a lot of folks kind of fly off the handle, which was interesting to watch. And I think part of the kind of backdrop of a lot of this abuse that happens online, and even kind of like the lesser shade of abuse, which is just the sort of condescension that I still get when I say I write about politics for Cosmopolitan. It's a very different reaction than I got when I said I write about politics for The Guardian. I think kind of the backdrop of it is that the less you are considered a person who has a right to speak, kind of the louder you seem when you do, and the more that makes people angry. So I think that's definitely true, of women as a whole, that we've sort of, for so long, been, seen as kind of decorative or domestic, and that going out in the public sphere and having a voice really makes people very upset. And I also think that's kind of the backdrop of why you see, for example, like women of color seeing a lot. I don't know if anybody's quantified this, but from my vantage point, it seems like more abuse online. And specific both sexist and racist abuse, because there are subgroups of women who are considered even kind of less entitled to be speaking out in public. So I think that's kind of an interesting and important way of looking at this too, is that part of it is about who's entitled to talk in public space, who's entitled to walk through public space. Female politicians, in this room and at this conference, I think see the same things. When they speak up, they're treated quite differently in sort of the public discourse, I think even still, than men are. Yeah. Jamila, has that been your experience that it's not just women, but there's a particular vitriol pointed at women of color online?
Absolutely. I receive vitriol from sexist men of all shapes, sizes, and colors, and certainly women who feel that they can earn that pat on the head or be affirmed by patriarchy and by those who really want to uphold it by belittling women, belittling the concept of feminism. I deal with racism within the feminist circles and movements that we're traveling in. So there are women who are proud, liberal, white feminists who don't necessarily know how to make space in the room for women of color, particularly poor women of color, to speak out and to speak for themselves. And so that's really difficult because you have a group of people who believe that they're standing on the side. Well, everyone believes that they're right. But this is a group that really feels that not only am I on the side of right, but I'm on your side. So just shush, we can talk this out, we can speak for you, we get it, you're poor, you're black, you're sad, you have problems. And, I do have a certain amount of privilege, of course, because I'm a middle class professional journalist for a mainstream publication. I went to college, I have a pretty decent quality of life. But because, as I said earlier, the internet has really democratized space. And the idea that anyone can be a feminist, anyone can be a public feminist, anyone can be a public intellectual, I have to also know when I should give and when someone else can speak to. I've never been a teen mother. So there's certain things that I can speak as an advocate, as an ally, as a friend, as a supporter, but that I have to learn when it's not my time to talk. But the vitriol makes it incredibly difficult, and that's why, I think folks like those of us up here are important, not so much that we're better feminists or smarter or sharper, but that we're comfortable dealing with this. Because I've seen people who really should be in this space, doing this work, writing publicly, going on television, talking about the important issues. But the way that the hatred and the abuse that you get online weighs on them makes it impossible.
Yeah.
You know, it can be very dangerous.
It's a very challenging thing to deal with. And again, I was wondering if you could share with us, I mean, how did you go from seeing these hateful things and having them really impact you? And, you know, I don't know where you are in your journey. I can tell you I still am very much mentally affected when I see those ugly things about myself online, but I have certain ways of coping with it. What ways of coping with it did you find?
Well, one of the ways was to avoid the particular, you know, sites that really were I mean, there were Facebook pages and crazy stuff, you know, devoted to the hatred of the Schuyler hatred. The fact that that term got coined and is now, I think, called the Schuyler effect or something, is wild to me, because I just thought I was playing a character on a television show. But I think it really ultimately it was a positive thing for me, I have to say, and that's an odd thing to say, but I really am, without it, it wouldn't have strengthened me in a lot of ways, and it wouldn't have involved me in wanting to speak up and speak out and wanting to do more in terms of trying to say this is not only happening to actresses, but it's happening to female journalists. It's happening to, you know, it's happening. It's an issue for every, yes, it's an issue for every single woman, and unless we can band together and form this community and move forward together, then I don't, you know, I want to do that for the next generation, and I want my children to know that when they have something that they believe in, that they firmly want to speak up about, they should have that absolute, not just right, but the feeling that they can do that and not be afraid of whatever is hurled at them. It's very important, I think.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that. You know, I think part of the problem is that too often people don't consider online harassment real harassment, that it's not as scary, that it's not, you know, a real thing. I talk to young college students a lot. I speak at colleges quite a bit. And something I hear overwhelmingly from them is, you know, I would have really been interested to be a writer or to be more public, but I see the abuse that you get online and I'm not going to do that. So we need to understand that we're losing a generation, and you hit on this, like, of writers, of potential politicians, of leaders, because they see the hatred that gets directed at women online and they're not interested in taking that on, and I can't say that I blame them. So I think we really need to start thinking about ways that we can lessen this, or at least lessen the harm. And I think the biggest thing that we can do is go after social media companies like Facebook and like Twitter and their leadership and demand that they do something about it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I had a good friend who I was trying to convince to run for office, and you know, she's smart, she's a lawyer, she, you know, is one, I just think she'd be great. So, you know, was sort of doing the Emily's List thing and having a conversation with her, you know, saying, maybe this is something you should think about doing someday, you know, and she said, you know, there's a bunch of reasons why I wouldn't want to run, but among them is that I follow you on Twitter, you know, and I see what people say to you. And I don't know how you do that day in and day out, because I couldn't, I don't want to, and I'm not doing it to myself. So I could not put myself in the public eye like that.
Wow.
You know, so for a group like this, that's something, I guess, to kind of have on the radar screen and to consider, because we do lose young women, you know, in any kind of public position, when any woman who's out in public gets treated the way that all of us on this panel have been treated.
And it's worth pointing out that, of course, most of the leadership of the tech companies that we're talking about, Facebook and Twitter, is male. So they've been, let's say charitably, a little bit late to the game in terms of realizing that this is a problem. Now, Twitter has just come out and said, look, we're in danger of losing half the population here if it's not a safe space for them. But so I'm interested, and I'll throw this out to the whole panel. I think this is such a vital issue because we are losing women voices. We're losing women who don't want to run for office because they don't want to subject themselves to this. How do we fight back? What are some solutions here? I think it's such an important problem. Jamila, go ahead.
I think really emphasizing the idea that this is real harassment, that the people behind the avatars and the accounts that you follow are actual people with thoughts and feelings. And I think it's even something I'm sure everyone on this panel can speak to, having to check yourselves, that maybe you gave somebody a snarky or sarcastic response because you were tired or you were having a bad day or you didn't like how they approached you and you didn't necessarily consider what they may be going through, that they had a bad day at work, that their mother's sick, that they were watching the election results and they were devastated. And to hold these companies accountable, we're making so much money for Facebook and Twitter. And though we're part of that small group that we've made money because of the things that we're able to do because of Facebook and Twitter, they're not writing checks to us and they're not being supportive of us and our issues. It's important, it's frightening that people have threatened my child, my workplace, my safety. They've made reference to members of my family, and that I can't even send a detailed report to Twitter and expect that somebody would dignify it with a thank you, this is on our radar, we'll see what we can do. That these IP addresses and these locations of these people, that some of whom are capable of actual physical violence, and even if they aren't, that this is an act of violence. Yeah. You know, but because it's hard to say, well, I'm not going to quit Twitter. You know, I'm not going to delete my Facebook page because then how am I going to talk to everyone? But there has to be some level of accountability on our part and a point where we have to say, we will delete. We will find other ways to connect with people online, and we will make this a difficult space for you to be in if you're not willing to affirm our right to safety in your spaces.
Yeah. Did you have something else?
Yeah, also, I mean, I think that it was in Britain that when the woman who wanted to put Jane Austen on the currency, and so I think it was two young people who tweeted I don't know how many vitriolic and violent and threatening things to her within the span of an hour, I think. And they were arrested, and they're gonna, I think, at least, am I correct about all these things? Yeah. They're gonna serve time. So I mean, there's a difference between saying I don't like what you're, you know, you can have your opinion, of course, because I know it makes people nervous. I think it gets into First Amendment issues. I understand that, but when somebody's saying, tell me where I can find her so I can kill her, I want to put an ice pick through her throat because I hate the way the dress she wore to the Golden Globes. I mean, you know, when it's an actual threat, I think there's got to be a line drawn. I think it's just that clear. But I understand the nervousness around it. But you can't be. That's where for me that's where the line needs to be.
Absolutely. I think the point that many of you raised about just because it's online doesn't mean it's not real and it doesn't exist is such an important one for our laws and our politicians and our law enforcement to catch up with. We had a comment from the audience, mostly for Jill. It says, I love the trend of magazines like Cosmo and Glamour highlighting feminist topics. Thank you. My daughter reads both, which is a really cool and gratifying statement. Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, one thing that we saw in 2014, and we're already starting to see in 2015, is a lot of very high-profile women like Anna Gunn and like Beyoncé, and most recently like Patricia Arquette, whose call for equal pay was very earnest, if not perfectly articulated. But is this a new trend? I mean, is this like the hot new thing in Hollywood, Jill, for powerful celebrity women to say, hey, I'm a feminist and this is why?
I mean, I hope so, and I hope when they say I'm a feminist, the "this is why" part also follows, so it just doesn't become kind of like a meaningless, empty term. This is a point that Anna Holmes has made a bunch of times, that it's not like these celebrities are kind of leading the feminist charge. It's like we've set the groundwork, and then it becomes a thing that is sort of socially acceptable or even cool or trendy to take on. I think that's a good thing. Even if a celebrity, unlike Beyoncé, isn't putting the definition of the word in their song, just by using the word feminist, you hope that, a 12-year-old girl who has access to the internet now is going to go and Google, and come across feministing and come across Jezebel, and sort of open up this universe that, at least for me personally, really didn't open up until I was in college and in my 20s. And now there is kind of that doorway that the internet offers, and that hopefully celebrities can kind of be the entry point for. The concern is always that the term will become so trendy and popular that it will eventually become meaningless. And a feminist is just anybody who does what they want. You know, it kind of becomes this like depoliticized, you know, feminism is about choosing my choice kind of thing. That, you know, that's obviously the downside. You know, but I do hope with the kind of really complex and nuanced conversations that are happening, I think in particular on the internet, but increasingly in mainstream kind of off-internet print media as well and on TV, you know, the kind of feminism as celebrity, as trend, can just be an entry point for people then to come in and learn more. And I think ultimately, that's probably a good and powerful thing.
Anna Holmes, is feminism a cool, trendy trend?
I don't know. I mean, I spent the majority of my life with it not being cool and trendy, even though I grew up in a like, liberal Northern California town, in a family where, again, it was an embraced word and concept. And oftentimes hammered home by my mom a lot. I don't know. I mean, I read things where people say it's trendy, and I just roll my eyes because, you know, I should feel happy about that if it is, but I don't like thinking of feminism or efforts for women's political and economic equality as being something that's like a fashionable dress or a pair of shoes.
I'd rather it be a fashionable dress than an unfashionable dress, though.
Okay. The thing is, you know, when I hear people giving props to female celebrities who are being outspoken about their feminism, or at least using the word, I also roll my eyes sometimes, because I think it's good that they're doing so, but again, I think that they're reflecting something that was already going on. I don't think that they're vanguards. And they're great entry points. And in fact, talking about pop culture is a really great entry point in terms of talking about gender politics, and that's what we were doing on our site a lot of the time. We were trying to be somewhat subversive by injecting gender politics into into pop culture. But I don't want pop culture to overtake the gender politics of it.
Jessica, speak to that. I mean, what is the impact on feminism as a movement of having really high-profile Emma Watson, Beyoncé, it's Patricia Arquette, proclaiming themselves to be feminists, talking about it in certain ways and on certain high-profile stages?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Anna. I think like it's great, but I think what's really interesting and what's really important about this moment is that obviously feminism right now has a tremendous amount of cultural power, probably more so than we have in decades. You know, so much so that like Sarah Palin is calling herself a feminist, and the right is, I mean, really, and the right is trying to co-opt. But they're trying to co-opt feminist rhetoric, which is not meaningless, which is important. Right. You know, and I think that shows, one, it's terrifying. But two, it goes to show our power, and I think the question is, so we have this cultural power, what are we going to do with it? Not like, what is Emma Watson going to do with it, but like, what are we going to do with it? The people who are doing this work on the ground, like, how can we use these platforms to get the message out there even more so, and have it be a message that is not like a watered down, more sort of mainstream palatable message, but a really progressive message that's coming from the grassroots, that's coming from people who are doing, you know, this work on the ground every day.
And again, what's your take on this?
Well, I do think I think that it's absolutely right that it can't become trendy to proclaim this because you feel like, okay, this is what I should do because people are jumping on the bandwagon. But I do think that if you have we're supposed to generally, as actors, as so-called as celebrities, which I don't like that word, but anyway, you know, it's not very popular to speak your belief like Patricia Arquette did at the Oscars. And was it a perfect utterance? Perhaps not, but I mean, I think that she had the conviction to stand up there and actually use that very large audience to say something important. She had, you know, 1 minute to say it or something. But the fact is that I agree, it has to be followed up by, it's always got to be followed by action. You can't just say the words, you have to follow with action and stand behind that belief.
Absolutely. Jamila, I'm interested in your view as well. If you want to talk about the Patricia Arquette thing, I mean, I thought it was interesting because she did have this moment and she used it to say something that people clearly had a very strong response to. And then she sort of inartfully, let's say, followed up in an interview and didn't seem to be inclusive of all women. For my part, I thought she deserved to be applauded for taking that little bit of time she had and trying to say something that was helpful for women. And I worried that the intensity of the backlash from feminists will discourage others from trying to take that moment to say their piece as well. But I wondered your thoughts.
You know, as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I'm sure she felt that she was getting a little bit of hell the next week after that award. It's unfortunate that her backstage comments were worse than the ones on stage, because if it had just stayed with what she said when she was accepting the award, I think people would have been really pleased with her. But I hope that because we're having this moment where feminism has become part of the pop culture lexicon, that we are informing people who want to speak on important issues so they are empowered and have their talking points ready. So even if you're on the spot, even if you didn't know you were going to get the award, you didn't know that you were going to talk about equal pay, but you just need to say something because this is your big opportunity, that you're not going to put your foot so far in your mouth as to say, and now the people of color and the gays, you got to get up and fight for us because the women have had your back all along, you know, because it's like, so what do we say of the queer women of color? Do they just not exist in this space? You know, I don't want to belittle somebody for being well-intentioned. I just simply would want, I think what we all want is for them to be also well-informed. And I think that what she did, it was the perfect example of privilege, you know? So it's like your heart, it's in a good place. But because in your experiences, you haven't really had to think about what it means to be perhaps a queer Mexican woman who is struggling to feed a family. And you're thinking of, you know, maybe equal pay is not on your radar. You know you don't make enough money. You might not know that the man who works next to you makes more than you do, but you know that you certainly deserve more for the fruit of your labor. And so when somebody really wants to advocate for women in general gets up and unintentionally erases you from the conversation, it certainly doesn't endear you to the concept of feminism. It doesn't make you want to stand in solidarity with her. I think it just leaves you kind of frustrated. So I hope that there comes a point where, and I think that Beyoncé has gotten her talking points together, that she knew to get the Chimamanda clip for her album that gave a very clear, concise definition of feminism. So even if she doesn't have it at the ready, there was somebody who said, we're going to put this on the record and this explains what you stand for, even better than any of us could have articulated it. I hope that people like Patricia Arquette, you know, folks who have access to celebrities and people who want to do feminist work and say, that's awesome. I know an organization that perhaps you could partner with. We're looking for a spokesperson. And here's some things that you should know so that you can be an effective champion of something that you believe in.
I want to turn to a more political focus. And you guys can applaud. That's very well said. And we have a question from the audience. Audience member asks, how do you think the evolving role of women in public life impacts how voters and the public perceive women candidates? How do we educate voters about their cultural biases against women? Jessica, you want to take a stab at that?
That's a big question.
It's a big one, yeah.
I mean, I think it's difficult. I tend to think that I'm sort of an eternal optimist, and I think that things, while the misogyny has sort of remained the same and gotten louder even, I think that feminism has gotten so much bigger along with it, and of course those two things are related. So I'm sort of hoping that like the sexism that female candidates face, and they faced it a lot for years, is not going to be tolerated in the same way that it was in years past. You know, in 2008, like, how many people were on Twitter? Not a lot, right? Like now there's millions and millions of people on Twitter, and the minute you say something stupid or sexist about women, there's a hashtag devoted to it, right? Like you can't, so I think that almost in a way, like sexism is going to work to female candidates' advantage in this strange way, where they're going to have this immediate support system coming behind them and really pointing out how out of touch, overwhelmingly it's Republican men who are out of touch with these issues, you know, they are when they say things like who's the guy that says, "Can you have a camera in the vagina?"
Oh my God.
Do you hear about
God.
that? They were arguing about an anti-choice bill, and a legislator asked a doctor who was testifying, "Well, can a woman just swallow a camera so that we can see what happens in a gynecological exam?" And the doctor says, "Well, no, because the mouth does not lead to the vagina."
This is the thing that actually happened.
It's a thing that actually happened.
Oh my. But you know, like liberal men are oftentimes very sexist as well, as we
That's
saw
true.
like during 2008. So it's not just. I mean, I'm not trying to like defend Republicans, believe me, but I feel like liberal dudes can be really sexist as well, as we saw during during 2008, and even a lot of the Democratic men's reactions to Sarah Palin. And believe me, I'm not a Sarah Palin fan, but like, you know, they would take a certain turn. You know, it's funny that we talk about Twitter, because I'm on Twitter, I love Twitter, but actually not that many people use Twitter, so I'm not sure. So I feel like sometimes it gets given
Disproportionate
importance because people in media and politics pay much more close attention to it than, let's say, my family in California, and I think for most Americans, Facebook is the predominant social media platform. But I do think that what Twitter does is that it does drive conversations within media. I mean, I think that something can happen on Twitter, and then, you know, HuffPost will pick it up, or Politico will pick it up, and they'll say that something's happening. But yeah, I do think if Hillary runs, there will be far less putting up with, for lack of a better phrase, of attacks directed at her that seem very gendered, or at least they will be shot down much more quickly than they were before. They were shot down pretty quickly in some quarters in 2008 on a lot of political blogs and feminist blogs, but this will be, I think, even quicker.
Jill, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that the power of sort of feminism in social media and online will do a really great job at combating the kind of more obvious sexism. To me, kind of the bigger hurdle is getting over sort of perceptions of female authority and female power, and how you kind of shift that, so people's sort of unconscious opinions about women in power. You know, which comes down to things like, you know, when you hear a woman talking on TV, you just sort of consider her less authoritative than, you know, the guy next to her. You know, they've done these studies of college professors who blind grade, you know, an essay, and when the essay is written by somebody named, you know, John Smith, he gets an A, and when it's written by Jane Smith, she gets a B. So, you know, these sort of unconscious and unintentional bits of sexism that we just aren't used to seeing. We aren't used to hearing a woman and considering her as intelligent, as well-informed, and as authoritative as men. And I think women both internalize that in their fear of running for office. I think they internalize it because we're not stupid, and we know how women are perceived. I really think the only way that you solve that is by getting women's voices into the public sphere as authority figures as often as men's. That means obviously running for office, you know, which Emily's List does a great job of pushing. It's also, and this might not be like the most popular opinion in this room, but it's a reason why I'm always glad when I see Republican women running for office too. I think the more women you just have out there, kind of ultimately the better. I think it's, you know, a matter of getting women on television shows, you know, having, Crystal, you do a great job of having women on your show, obviously, but, you know, getting women onto the Sunday political shows, which are overwhelmingly dominated by men. Getting women onto the primetime shows, getting women to come and talk about things like foreign policy. You know, you have women that are on the ground doing this reporting and this work, but they just aren't tapped to be experts on television nearly as often as men are. So, you know, it's shifting the political landscape and the media landscape, not just about sexism and feminism specifically, but about really having women's voices talking about every single issue that matters. I think that's the only way that we're going to combat the kind of subtle sexism that keeps women out of office.
I also think it's important that we have a diverse group of women, and I mean not just racially and ethnically diverse, but in terms of age, because the thing is that it seems like because women are still tend to be prized for their fertility, for lack of a better word, for how pretty they are and how young they are, like, are they of childbearing age, and that they you know, lose some legitimacy in the public's eyes when they get older, or they aren't a certain size dress. I think it's important for us to have lots of different representations of women, so that we stop valuing women only for their perceived sexuality. And you know, when I watch television, a lot of times the guests who are female fit a certain mold, and the men can be really anybody of any size, and that's kind of irritating to me. So I would like to see a more diversity of age, ethnicity, et cetera, in public life.
But Anne, again, that's not a problem in Hollywood, right? Ageism towards women.
No,
you guys have that all figured out, right?
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, no, I mean, it's what is encouraging is that, especially on television right now, there are roles, many more roles for women. As you know, it used to be, the thought was that you reached 35 or 40 and it was over. And I remember being told that all the time, and believing it and thinking it was real. And then it's opened up, the landscape has opened up so much on television that finally you don't have to just be the wife or the mother or, you know, the girlfriend, essentially taking the back seat and always standing behind the man. And I think, again, that's also very important because that our medium is so influential, and it does create ideas in young women's minds of what they can be or what they should be. And when they're seeing roles that are complex and diverse and where the woman is actually standing in front, you know, and leading the way, and as you say, being in a position of authority and having a strong voice, that is a tremendously important thing, and it's something I hope we continue to foster, and it's very, very important.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I have to do our last question here and wrap things up. Jessica Valenti, to close on sort of a positive note, are we making progress, right? Are we making progress? You don't have to say yes. You could close it on an ugly note if you want to. But are we making progress in terms of the way women are represented? Are we making progress in terms of women feeling like they see themselves represented both in Hollywood and in media and in powerful positions across the country?
Like I said, I'm an optimist, so I'll say yes. I think we're making progress, but not nearly fast enough, and without nearly enough sort of support from the mainstream. So I'll say yes, but with a caveat.
Excellent. Well, if I could take one last moment of personal privilege, my daughter, Ella Marie, is in the room, and today is her 7th birthday, and all she wanted was to be here tonight to hear Hillary Clinton speak. So I feel like that's a little bit of progress right there. Happy birthday, Ella, I love you. And I want to thank all of our panelists so much. Jessica, Anna, Jill, Anna, Jamila, you guys are fabulous, and I look up to each and every one of you, and I'm so glad you exist in the world. Thank you so much.